Hello there, Mike Levin. July 13th, 2017 at around 9 a.m. Heading into the office, walking down 34th Street. And on previous videos, I talked a lot about the age of the jack of all trades, like ye old webmaster, actually coming back and being upon us again. And I thought I'd elaborate that and probably turn that into the subject of this video. I know I wander a lot in my topics, and sometimes I'm hard-pressed to figure out what to title my videos, because it's just free association each day, either processing after a day's work or thinking through the day ahead of me. So this is walking in, thinking through the day ahead of me, and I realized that a lot of the work I did yesterday was all this DevOps stuff in preparation for retiring one of the free tier Amazon Elastic Computing Cloud instances, the kind that you can sign up for if you give it a credit card, and it doesn't really remain free after a year, and I just passed that. So I'm being charged anywhere from $5 to $9 a month now for a server. And you know, it's just more, you know, testament to the brilliance of Amazon that they can get tire kickers on the hook for paying for a virtual server and, you know, accumulate their firsthand, you know, experience with the cloud world on their ecosystem and pay for the privilege of doing it. Good work, Jeff. Anyway, it's time to turn that off, to retire it. And so I'll be migrating a lot of the work. It wasn't really much work, but I'll be migrating the function that this particular EC2 instance was performing. And that's going to involve doing a Postgres install. That's a SQL database along the lines of MySQL, but so much better for so many reasons, starting with it's not owned by Oracle. And just do the gradual migration of functions from one server to another. So I'm changing data connections that were established through IPs, hardwired internet addresses, over to soft-wired registered domain name addresses. I chose one of the many registered domains I keep, created a subdomain on it, and I'm using that now for this function so that I can play the shell game with where things actually occur. And transferring files around between these types of servers I used to do by zipping it up and transferring it with SCP, which is the secure copy protocol built into pretty much all Linux and Unix systems, and kind of a pain in the ass because one of the machines has to be set up as a, you know, internet accessible, TCP/IP accessible server, and then you can SCP copy from it. And in the age of Dropbox and Google Drive, no longer desirable. I just have one or the other of those two services always running somewhere, so that I just move files into those locations and they propagate around as a common base of files on all the systems that need access to the same data. It's almost like, you know, poor man's distributed database. Although I tend to use flat files these days, and there's so many nested discussions here. The fact that for a lot of everyday database uses for, you know, non-mission critical marketing monitoring services, there's nothing wrong with flat files so long as you have the hard drive space to store them. And if you can zip them as you go, even all the better. I'm sure you get compression efficiencies that are, you know, in line with databases. When you're not using a database, it's not like, you know, well, when you are using a database, it's not like the data gets stored with no cost. There is hard drive storage being used somewhere. The only question is who administrates it and how. And that's why things like the Amazon S3 name value pair, you know, bucket, data bucket, is so popular, because you can just keep pouring stuff into that and it seems like you have unlimited storage, but of course Amazon charges you for that because they're the ones doing the administration on that. And all my systems could be switched over so that the database portion currently being done with flat files could actually be in the Amazon S3 bucket or an instance of Postgres or almost anything else, because of the magic little bonus of using Python in that it has such standardized APIs for data storage, for key value object style data storage, that the popular ones have, you know, supplementary packages made so that instead of something like the Shelve API, which uses Python pickling, there's stories here, but you know, Python has a built-in kind of awesome object database persistent store mechanism that just drops the files in a binary yet native Python sort of way onto the hard drive. And when you do that with a whole series of objects, instead of merely pickling, you're using the Shelve API. You're putting your pickles on a shelf. And you can swap out the Shelve API with things that make your data reside actually in the Amazon S3 cloud or on a, you know, internal, you know, your company DevOps provided database, which may in turn be Amazon. You know, I'm starting to do more things with Redshift, which is the Amazon cloud version of Postgres, which is again a SQL database, a lot along the lines of MySQL. So there's a whole soup of stuff going on here. And as someone who's just doing general web consulting, that's what SEO is. How do you publish, even though it's more than just the web, it's internet consulting really. How do you publish information into the world so that it is most easy to find? And in providing that kind of advice on a case-by-case basis, each thing you're publishing, you often do investigations looking at a lot of different data from different sources, so you have to be able to do these API calls, these requests from here and there, and deal with authentication and other data access issues. And then once you have the data pulled back, you have to figure out how to make it persist over time. The typical answer is dropping it into a database somewhere, but databases have all this administration overhead. It's a lot of moving parts, which if all you're really trying to do is create something like an Excel file and put it on something like a hard drive so that you can load it again later and maybe load a series of such files at the same time to do some trending, all you really have to do is drop flat files, especially if you're the exclusive user. All you have to do is drop these flat files, oftentimes CSVs, onto a hard drive and optionally compress them with one of the many various optional compression techniques that gets really awesome. You know, we're talking, you know, 20% of its original size, 80% compression, pretty easily on the kind of data we're talking about, because there's URLs and some metric associated with that URL over and over, day after day. So whenever you have the same text recurring here and here and here and here, and just some little thing changes each time, the compression algorithms really oftentimes work very well, and file systems are a solid alternative to databases. And the parallels between databases and file systems is repeatedly demonstrated by such things as Git. Git is, you know, the revision control system that has taken the world by storm because it's the one where the Linux kernel is maintained. And it was created by the same guy who made the Linux kernel, Linus Torvalds. He was modeling it after some proprietary software they had to stop using. So just like Linux itself was modeled after Unix, Git was modeled after, I don't know, Bitbucket or Bitstream, I don't know, one of those bit names. Company who's, you know, lost to history because they did not jump on the free and open source bandwagon with a category of software that was really primed for it. So There was even other entries. Mercurial or HG is a native Python version of the same kind of stuff. Could have been Git, but Linus wrote Git. It was used for the Linux kernel. It was used for GitHub, the popular social site for sharing free and open source software. So Git won, and the reason I bring it up is because it's very much modeled after file systems. Each commit of your code and each time you push it to the main repo creates differential backups. With every once in a while, I presume some sort of full frame copy to make sure of the integrities for optimization and speed interacting with it. So Git, even though it's a distributed revision control system that creates one big file lump on your system, or I guess a bunch of files, it actually is modeled after file systems, even though it's working a lot like a database. It's that blurred line between file system and database that demonstrates how similar they actually are. And the main difference between a file system and a database is really just in your head. It's not thought of that way a lot these days because database for the longest time meant relational tables. Lots of, say, Excel tabs where there's relationships between values between the different tabs. That more or less is RDBMS, Relational Database Management Systems. And those are usually SQL, and those are the names you hear all the time, like SQL Server and MySQL and Postgres. And databases oftentimes meant that rigid row and column, tabular kind of approach to data. NoSQL has sort of busted that wide open, but that's nothing new. There's been a bunch of NoSQL things out for the longest time, including file systems themselves, the great unsung hero of NoSQL. Then, of course, the Berkeley DB, I think it's DBM, was built into Unix since the very earliest days, the late 60s, and has evolved and was another one of those things snatched up by Oracle so that its greater significance could not really set into the free and open source world, because if, God forbid, it was distributed for free as part of some Unix package like BSD, Oracle could lose some money. So this is my interpretation of it anyway. So Oracle snatched up Berkeley DB and set back NoSQL by a few decades. It could have been just as big of a deal during the rise of RDBMS, relational databases, during the age of Informix. There's a bunch of them out there back in those days that have been gobbled up by other people that have to today evolved into SQL Server and MySQL and all the rest that you probably hear about. IBM, I forget theirs, but they've got a big one. At least one. So, this high-end stuff you barely ever dabble with, but that's actually part of the point. The APIs to the high-end stuff is very often the same exact APIs to the free stuff that ships with, a Python core installation. So you start making persistent objects using your local file system today, and down the line you hit scaling and storage limitations. You just wire it to Amazon S3. Sure, there will be a little bit of code adjustment and refactoring, but not much, a lot less than you would think. And you can start out on a super easy editing environment like Jupyter Notebook and then migrate it over to .py files running on a plain vanilla Linux server like an Amazon AMI server, which I'm using Ubuntu, but for the most part that's what I'm doing. I'm doing my experimentation on Jupyter Notebook. When I'm happy with it, I move it off my local machine and into the cloud to make sure all the connectivity is equivalent, make sure I'm not hitting file storage limitations, upping my AWS instance, my EC2 Elastic Computing Cloud virtual server instances to keep pace with my demands, and then realizing where my bottlenecks are and planning for sort of a next iteration where I make all the system administration and DevOps stuff more in line with the requirements of my application. So I'm doing all this DevOps and sysadmin stuff, which in the past you would need such an enormous set of skills for, each one requiring sort of a lifetime commitment. But this day and age, mostly through APIs, almost always accessible through, you know, internet TCP/IP protocols, with the only price being sort of the lag of the internet. You use simpler commands, still in usually the Unix/Linux text-based environment. This stuff is still almost always script and text file driven, so sorry you can't get away from that old school Linux stuff, which is always part of my message. So that's pretty much it. I loved being an old school jack of all trade webmasters. It gave me a certain feeling of power and magic and wizardry, and that is happening again now with having to provide answers to questions. You know, you're not the publisher anymore, you're working for the publisher, but all the same questions occur, and your ability to do these, you know, stupid data tricks depends on becoming, once again, a jack of all trades. So that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. Hope to talk to you soon, and don't forget to subscribe.